The year is 869. The fields of southern Iraq are heavy with salt and misery. Enslaved Africans known as the Zanj labor under brutal conditions, reclaiming swamps for the Abbasid elite. Their lives are short, their burdens endless, their chains unforgiving. In our world, they rose in rebellion, led by a charismatic figure named Ali ibn Muhammad. For nearly 15 years, they carved out territory, stormed cities, and shook the caliphate to its core before being crushed. But imagine this, the rebellion does not fail. The Abbasids, distracted by rival dynasties and distant revolts, failed to muster the strength to retake Iraq. Instead, the Zanj army grows, fed by deserters, disaffected peasants, and ambitious generals. Basra falls not temporarily but permanently. The rebellion surges north, and in 876, Baghdad itself, jewel of the Abbasid caliphs, falls to the Zanj. For the first time in Islamic history, the caliphate is ruled not by Arabs or Persians, but by Africans who rose from slavery. The immediate shock is earth-shattering. The Abbasid caliph flees west to Damascus, his authority shattered. The House of Wisdom, symbol of Abbasid learning, is seized. Scholars, stunned, must now debate under Zanj rulers who demand legitimacy in Islam's eyes. Mosques in Baghdad proclaim sermons in the name of a new leader, Ali ibn Muhammad, styling himself not just king, but commander of the faithful. The caliphate is torn apart. Zoom into individual lives. A Zanj soldier, once whipped in the marshes, now rides through Baghdad's gates in triumph, sword at his side, his head held high. A merchant in Basra, who once traded under Abbasid taxes, now negotiates with Zanj overseers who demand grain for their new empire. A scholar in Baghdad, horrified, hides manuscripts in his cellar, fearing they will be destroyed by the victors. A farmer in the marshes, once crushed by debt, celebrates liberation under rulers who promise justice for the oppressed. Culturally, the implications are vast. Islam, once dominated by Arab elites, is reshaped by African leadership. The Zanj rulers, needing legitimacy, embrace Islam but interpret it through their own lens. They emphasize equality before God, denouncing the Arab aristocracy that enslaved them. Mosques resound with fiery sermons about justice for the downtrodden. Slavery itself, though not abolished, is curbed. African rulers will not tolerate their people being bound again. Baghdad transforms in our world. It remained the heart of the Abbasid Golden Age. Here, it becomes a revolutionary capital. African generals sit in palaces once occupied by caliphs. The architecture shifts, blending Islamic domes with East African motif, scroll stone carvings, Swahili patterns, wooden beams etched with African designs. Markets brim with goods not just from Persia and India, but from East Africa: ivory, gold, spices from Zanzibar. Religion fractures. The Abbasid caliphs had claimed universal authority over Islam. With Baghdad in rebel hands, that authority crumbles. The Abbasid caliph in exile denounces the Zanj as heretics, rallying Arab and Persian Muslims against them. Meanwhile, Shia communities in Persia, already hostile to Abbasid rule, flirt with alliance, seeing the Zanj as fellow revolutionaries against Sunni elites. Islam, instead of maintaining even the illusion of unity, splinters earlier, with rival caliphates and imams vying for loyalty. Zoom again to daily lives. A Shia merchant in Kufa, long marginalized, now finds opportunity trading with Zanj officials. An African trader from Kilwa, sailing up the Persian Gulf, discovers his kin ruling Baghdad, astonished that his people now sit among the world's great empires. A Sunni scholar in Damascus preaches fury against the African usurpers, fueling jihad against them. A Zanj child in Basra, born free, hears stories of his father's chains and dreams of a future without them. Globally, the ripple spreads. The Abbasids had symbolized the Islamic Golden Age, their scholars translating Greek texts, their astronomers charting the stars. Under Zanj rule, priorities shift. Learning does not vanish, but it changes focus. Instead of patronizing philosophers and mathematicians for elite amusement, the Zanj emphasized practical knowledge engineering for irrigation, medicine for the poor, military science for survival. Baghdad becomes less a city of philosophers and more a fortress of revolution. The Byzantine Empire, watching from the west, sees opportunity. In our world, the Byzantines struggled against a strong Abbasid Caliphate. Here, they face a fractured Islamic world. They ally with Arab loyalists against the Zanj, pushing eastward, reclaiming territory in Anatolia and Syria. Constantinople celebrates victories unthinkable in our timeline. Africa itself changes course. In our world, East Africa's Swahili coast grew wealthy trading with Arabia and India, but never projected empire inland. Here, with Baghdad ruled by Africans, the Swahili states gain prestige. Caravans from Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar march proudly into Mesopotamia. The Indian Ocean trade, already rich, now flows through African hands. East Africa rises centuries earlier as a cultural and economic power. By the 10th century, the Islamic world is permanently altered. The Abbasid claim to universal leadership is gone. Instead, there are three great Islamic powers: the African Zanj Caliphate in Baghdad, the Abbasid remnant in Damascus, and rival Shia states in Persia. Islam becomes plural earlier, less centralized, more contested. For Europe, this means opportunity. Crusades, centuries later, face not a single united Muslim world but fractured powers, zoom once more to individuals. A Christian pilgrim in Jerusalem, in our history oppressed under Muslim rule, now negotiates with Zanj governors more tolerant of minorities. A Jewish scholar in Baghdad, rather than fleeing persecution, thrives under rulers who see his learning as useful. A Persian poet in Shiraz mocks the African rulers in verse, while secretly admiring their defiance. A Zanj commander in Basra, once nameless, has his story sung across Africa as a hero who brought down a caliph. By the 13th century, when Mongols storm into the Middle East, the picture is radically different. In our world, they sacked Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Golden Age. Here, they face a Zanj-ruled Mesopotamia. African generals, hardened by centuries of rebellion and survival, resist fiercely. Perhaps they fall, but perhaps they adapt, hiring African cavalry from the Horn, forging alliances with India. The Mongols still devastate, but the survivors are different: an African-led Islamic empire that refuses to bow. The Renaissance in Europe shifts too. In our world, Europe rediscovered Greek texts through Abbasid Baghdad. In this alternate history, Baghdad under Zanj rule still translates, but with African influence. European scholars studying Arabic texts in Spain and Sicily find not just Aristotle, but African proverbs, Swahili poetry, and medical practices from the East African coast. The Renaissance blooms with African as well as Arab fingerprints. By the modern era, the consequences are vast. Africa, often marginalized in our history, becomes central centuries earlier. Instead of being carved into colonies in the 19th century, African states already boast centuries of prestige. Europe approaches Africa not as a continent to exploit, but as a rival to respect or fear. The Atlantic slave trade, which in our world devastated Africa, may never grow so vast. How could Europeans justify enslaving Africans when African empires had once ruled Baghdad itself? One last zoom to personal stories. A young African scholar in Timbuktu in 1500, hearing tales of the Zanj Caliphate, sees himself part of a proud tradition. A Portuguese sailor on the Indian Ocean, instead of treating East Africans as traders only, bows to governors who recall their ancestors' Baghdad throne. A European philosopher in Paris, translating Arabic texts, marvels at Zanj commentaries on justice and freedom, carrying them into Enlightenment thought. And a child in Basra, centuries later, plays in streets where Africans once overthrew the world's mightiest empire, never knowing how fragile history truly was. Would this world be better For the Zanj themselves, and outwardly the enslaved become rulers, the oppressed become free. For Islam, more fractured, less centralized, but also more diverse, shaped by voices long ignored. For Africa, a leap forward into history's center stage. For Europe, a renaissance flavored by African thought. For the world, a reminder that power does not always flow from the places we expect. The Zanj Rebellion nearly toppled the Abbasids in our world, but failed. Yet, had it succeeded, the Caliphate itself would have been remade not Arab, not Persian, but African at its heart. And history, from Baghdad to Zanzibar, from Paris to Timbuktu, would never have been the same, so what do you think? Would a Zanj victory have reshaped Islam for the better or plunged the world into deeper chaos? Drop your thoughts below and subscribe to Sheriff Reactions. Hit the bell for daily flips where we explore not just what happened but what might have been.